You go to the bookstore, you get very excited, you buy loads of books, you go home, and then nothing. If that's you, keep watching this video. A bit of a warning though, there will be some controversial advice in here, which some of it you will have never heard before, and some of it goes against all the best advice you have heard before. Nevertheless, these are the things that have always worked for me. I want to get something straight though. This video is deliberately not titled How to Read More Books because the number does not matter. It's not a race. You're not supposed to be aiming to read X amount of books. Reading is supposed to be about an internal joy. And yes, typically, if we enjoy something, we're doing more of it, but that's for me is more of a side effect rather than the goal we should be striving for. So if you used to maybe quite enjoyed reading but then you lost that spark, or maybe you used to enjoy reading quite a bit but then life got busy and other commitments got in the way, or maybe you're a total beginner, either way, this video is for you. Tip number 1, don't sign up to a book club. Now, please don't get mad at me for saying this. I know loads of people love book clubs, but let me explain. If you are at the stage where you are struggling to get back into that joy of reading, book clubs won't work for you. Why? Because the reading list is heavily dictated by someone other than you, and oftentimes it is also heavily influenced by TikTok and Instagram recommendations, which just follow popular trends. And the only way for you to get back into reading is to read what you personally like. What sometimes happens with book clubs, you feel obligated to finish a book that you maybe have started but you don't like. It's not aligned with your personal interests. And what then happens is you associate reading experience with a chore. And effectively, eventually, you give up. And so then you are less likely to grab a book and read on your own initiative. So it's a bit of a chain reaction. Now, let me be clear, I am not saying that book clubs are bad. I'm just saying that when you are trying to seriously get back into that joy of reading, what you need to do is to read a book that you have chosen that is perfectly aligned with what currently interests you, and also without the added pressures of artificial deadlines for finishing the book. Tip number 2 is don't go into bookstores. I know. You'll be saying, what do you mean? How am I supposed to read books without walking into a bookstore and buying books? My advice is don't go into bookstores and on a whim buy a bunch of books. I guarantee you these will not be the books for you. Why? Well, there are 2 reasons. Since you bought those books on an impulse, they are seriously less likely to be the books that have themes that actually interest you. And the second reason is the last thing you want is to associate books and therefore reading with overspending guilt. Every time you're going to look at all those unread books on your shelves, you are going to feel guilty. And then you're going to feel less confident in yourself. And the more time passes, the less likely you'll be able to reach for them. If you don't believe me, you just have to look at all those videos on BookTube where you've got people talking about these big hauls that they do. They buy a huge bunch of books and then 6 months later they are unhauling half of them. How many books you buy often doesn't translate into how many books you read. And that's because buying books and reading books are 2 different things. And tip number 3 is maybe a little bit more obvious to you now that I've mentioned the first 2 tips, but it is basically to have your own reading list. Here on BookTube, we call it TBR, which means to be read. So have your own TBR and stick to it. This will require some preparation, a little bit of research, and yes, you will need to put some time into it. But like with anything in life, the more time we put into something, the more we tend to value it and the more we tend to act on it. And what you're gonna end up with is this curated TBR that makes you feel excited. I highly recommend buying used books on eBay or borrowing them from your local library. Basically, the harder you work for something, the more likely you will appreciate it. There is nothing more exciting than getting a message from your local library that the book you've been waiting for weeks has suddenly arrived and is ready for collection. I bet you anything, as soon as you will pick it up, you will start reading it because you feel like you have earned it, and also you have anticipated it for such a long time that it will feel like a prize. Now, for those of you who hate for some reason the idea of reading a used book and you have to have a new book, then what I would highly recommend is go to an independent bookstore, the smallest you can find ideally, for 3 reasons. One, because they are likely not to have your book in stock, and so they will have to order it for you, so you'll get that anticipation effect. 2, a bookseller in an independent bookstore will be more likely to have time to have a chat with you, which could be very inspiring. I'm not saying that the employees of bookstores chains do not have the same knowledge. I'm just saying they're usually under more pressure to serve more customers, and therefore automatically they have less time to have a proper chat with you. And finally, reason 3, which may be the most important, you will not get distracted by all those book tables that you see in chain stores that have buy one get one free book or buy one get one half price. Again, they often follow popular trends that sometimes are just not good, and more often than not will not be aligned with your interest. And like I said, the trick is to stick to your TBR. Number 4, don't read short books. I know this goes against all the advice you will probably by now have heard here on BookTube. People are saying read something shorter so that you feel like you have finished something, that you've had that initial success. I disagree. I have a problem with this approach because it is difficult to get properly invested into something that is a short story or a novella. I am not saying you have to reach for War and Peace. I'm just saying grab a regular novel. If you in the position where you're trying to get back into reading, you want to get properly invested into the lives of the characters. You have to feel for them. You have to want to learn their story inside out. And to do that, you have to get properly stuck into the expanded story about them. Again, I'm not saying short stories are bad. What I'm saying is only with a longer novel, or most of the time, you get to go on that emotional ride that will keep you coming back for more. Number 5. Don't set goals. I've touched on this in my introduction. Don't set yourself goals, and especially, please, don't set yourself numerical goals. What do they mean? You could set yourself to read, I don't know, 10 books over the next 2 months, but doesn't mean you got yourself back into the joy of reading. Maybe, maybe not. It depends what you've read. Was it a horrible experience? Did you force yourself because you decided you had to reach that goal and you're very competitive? Goals are worthless when you're trying to get back into the joy of reading. Now, the only one goal which I think is productive here is to write down your reflections on the book. Grab a notebook, maybe after you finish the book, or maybe while you're still reading it and you had an interesting thought to write down. It could be just one sentence. You don't want it to feel like a chore, right? But what it does, it makes you stop and think about the book. With that comes a connection, which is what you want. And with this one, I would recommend to do it with a pen and paper rather than with a computer or your phone. There is a special power in writing things down. We learn more, we memorize better, and we become more creative, which in turn makes us feel good. Number 6, don't finish books you don't enjoy. Unless your profession is dependent on reading books, the only person you are reading for is you. Therefore, you have the luxury of choosing what you read. So read what excites you. Read what you enjoy. And this means ditching the books that don't grab you. So maybe try new formats, maybe try new genre, maybe don't try anything new. Maybe stick to what you remember you liked when you used to enjoy reading, and don't let anyone tell you that certain types of books, like, I don't know, romance for example, is not a real reading. If it gets you back into reading, it's useful and it is still reading. It still expands your vocabulary. It still inspires your imagination. By the way, if you are looking for a guidance on when to know that you need to give up on a book, just follow your instincts. Sometimes that will be reading half of the book and then realizing, actually, I've given it a fair chance and I really don't enjoy it. I want to move on to something that I will like. Sometimes it will be quarter of a book. I've also read somewhere a librarian rule, which means you have to subtract your age from 100, and that is the number of pages that you should read before giving up on the book. So for example, if I'm 46, then that means I should read at least 54 pages before giving up on the book. So feel free to apply it or not. Number 7, watch BookTube. Now obviously I'm a little bit biased here because I'm a booktuber. And maybe you're saying, hold on, I thought this was supposed to be about reading more and not watching more videos. Hear me out. I think there is nothing more contagious than enthusiasm of someone who is super excited about a book they've just read, and now they are telling you about it. This will fire you up. It fires me up. It will make you want to read those books in a way that I don't think a written review can make you read. It's just because review or reading a review is more of a passive experience, whereas a video is a more, I want to say, interactive. It's not technically interactive, but you know what I mean. Now, there are a couple of key rules here for me. One, what do you want to watch is people talking about books that they have actually read. So you need to avoid people talking about their TBR list because they haven't read those books. So you don't know if they're actually good and they will be the ones that will excite you. Obviously, avoid videos titled "The Worst Books I've Ever Read." That goes without saying. Another one to avoid is book haul videos for the reasons I've mentioned already. And also avoid reading wrap-ups because sometimes they include books that were not good, so you'll just waste your time. When you're trying to build your TBR and when you're trying to get excited about reading, the type of video I would recommend the most is the video titled "Best Books I've Read This Year." So you can go back and watch some videos, not just from 2024, you can go further back to 2023, 2022, pick a couple of booktubers that feel like they aligned with your interest and watch their best of the year books videos. Why? Because these type of videos are super positive, they're uplifting. These people are talking about the most brilliant books they've read in the last 12 months. And this is why that is bound to get you excited as well and help you with your TBR. And the rule number 2 is, please don't go on TikTok or Instagram for book recommendations. Short form reviews won't give you the depth required to get you really excited about reading. You won't get the full impact of that excitement either. But also, recommendations on TikTok and Instagram tend to cater to the most popular trends, which are not always good and which are unlikely to be aligned with your very specific interests. So it will be just a waste of time, and the worst case scenario, you'll just end up scrolling instead of reading. Number 8, treat your book like your phone. This is simple. Just like the phone, the book goes everywhere with you. In my recent video on new habits, I talked about how I always, when I wake up in the morning, before I go downstairs to the kitchen, I grab the book I'm currently reading with me, so that throughout the day, even if I'm working from home, that book is always with me and I grab it whenever I have a minute. Think about how often we reach for our phone throughout the day. Well, if we just replaced it with a book, surely that would get us back into reading. Not mentioning it'd be so much better for our mental health. In fact, I want to start a revolution. I want to start a revolution where we as a society make it acceptable for us to bring a book to a social event. I know this is very controversial, but let's just think about it for a minute. You go to a party, you bring your phone with you. You go to meet up with your friends in a local pub, you bring your phone with you, and actually often these phones are right there in front of your plates or drinks, and you will check that phone multiple times throughout the night. Now imagine the same with a book. And yes, I know, it's a shocker, isn't it? Most people would get offended, but if we can do it with a phone, why can't we do it with a book? Whenever I think about reading a book in a restaurant, I always think about my father-in-law, who used to drive my mother-in-law crazy because he was never without a book. He would always carry a book in his pocket, and he would take it even when the two of them would go out to dinner. I think there is something to it. Let's say you're meeting with me for a drink and you say to me, oh, I have to check my phone, it could be work. Surely I'm allowed to read a paragraph on my book in that time as you're checking your phone? That's fair, isn't it? Come on, let's start a revolution. Oh, also, almost forgot. If you commuting on the train, top tip, deliberately forget your earphones. Don't take your earphones with you. I have discovered this by mistake when I forgot my earphones. And actually, because without earphones you can't really listen to anything on the internet when you're in a public space because you're disturbing other commuters. But at the same time, you're sitting there a little bit bored, you will reach for the book. Number 9. Holiday inspirations. I have not heard anyone talking about this, but one way to get excited about reading is, before you go on holiday, do a bit of research about the destination you're visiting and find a book that talks about that destination, or maybe its author comes from that country, or maybe the book has some kind of a particular local theme. So for example, in a couple of weeks, my family and I are going for a few days to southern Spain. And so I've researched and got myself a book that talks about southern Spain that is a modern classic titled A Rose for Winter, and it is by Laurie Lee. The author wrote this book during a winter time, and I'm going to Spain in the winter time, so I'm very excited about reading it. It helps that the format of this book is very portable. If you're interested to hear more about this particular book, then watch my February reading wrap-up video, which I will likely to post mid-March. So yes, because we tend to associate holiday with positive experiences, we are more likely to get excited about reading a book that has some kind of a connection with our holiday destination. And it doesn't even have to be holiday. It could be a one-day trip somewhere. It could be an afternoon sightseeing trip in your local area. Maybe you'll find out something interesting that you never knew before. Number 10, a reading slot. This next tip is for those of you who don't have much time to read. I hear you. You have full-time jobs. Sometimes you have 2 jobs. You have small kids, you have dogs, you have cats, you have elderly parents who rely on you, and everyone wants a piece of you, and there's nothing left for you, and there's certainly no time left for you to read. But listen, each member of your family will have in the week an allocated slot for something that they enjoy. You know, it could be your kids' football club. Could be your daughter's little play date in a local park. It could be your partner meeting up with friends. I would encourage you to, in a similar way, negotiate a regular slot in the week for you to have to read. Ask them and put it in the diary. Reserve it for yourself so that it's there and so that you can look forward to it. It could be, for example, Sunday afternoon when you say, okay, for 1 hour between 5 and 6 p.m. I want to read my book. Even better, if you have family with kids, call it a reading hour and make everyone read. The problem with finding time to read sometimes is that we are hoping that magically there will be a little slot of time for us to enjoy our book. And surprise, surprise, that doesn't happen. So we need to treat it like we would treat any other business appointment. We have to schedule it. Now, if you're transparent about it, if you put it out there in this way, I guarantee you, your family will help you with this and cooperate with you so that for 1 hour a week, you get to do what you enjoy. Now, if they say no, do it anyway. Listen, if they're not willing to give it to you, just steal it. Take it. So maybe your work meeting has overrun by an hour, and in reality, you snuck into a cafe and read your book for an hour while sipping a delicious cup of tea. Or maybe that queue in the grocery store was extremely long today. Or maybe that wait in doctor's practice was surprisingly long today. Yes, I am inviting you to lie to your family, but only the kind of family that are not willing to give you 1 hour to yourself so you can enjoy your book. I think that's fair. There you have it. 10 things to do or not to do to get back into the joy of reading. These are the 10 things that have worked for me, and maybe they will work for you too. Or maybe you have some other unusual and slightly controversial advice for those of us who are trying to get back into reading. Please do share it, and I'll see you in my next week's video.